I want to tell you all about some Majestic wink writing. I've been reading through my stockpile of back issues that I've been building since my wife and I started planning to have a child. That means that right now I am reading through the various Wildstorm Universes books that I've picked up at dollar sales and 50-cent sales and dollar bins and stuff like that. And specifically that means that I am reading through what I've collected for Mr. Majestic. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mr. Majestic was originally created in 1994, appearing in a backup story for Wildcats, Volume 1, Issue 11. He was originally created by artist Jim Lee and H.K. Proger. Now, who the heck is H.K. Proger? I have no idea, and trying to do research on him, I can find nothing about him except for the fact that he did a little bit of work for Wildstorm Comics. But I do know a little bit more about Jim Lee, penciler, writer, and one of the architects behind the Wildstorm universe. Lee wanted to create a character like Majestic to address his view that the superpowered characters of Marvel and DC were extremely reticent about using their power to change the world. Sure, they would defend the way the world currently existed, but they never did big things that would change the world as a whole, despite easily being able to. In worlds like Marvel's and DC's, this is necessary for believability. Marvel often bills itself as the world outside your window, and its characters are meant to feel like real people with real world problems. But if you have a bad guy like, I don't know, drop a satellite on Australia and then blow the whole thing up, suddenly that world doesn't feel like our world anymore. It feels like something that was made up. It just shifts the whole dynamic of the storytelling. Wildstorm wanted to challenge this idea from the jump, though. They didn't have corporate overlords to answer to or decades of continuity that defined who they were and what they could do in a storytelling capacity. Image Comics and the various artistic studios that were created to publish under that banner were finally free to do whatever they wanted, however they wanted. To that end, in comic book shorthand, Mr. Majestic is basically the Wildstorm universe's equivalent to Superman. Now, he isn't Superman, but that's kind of the fast, easy pitch for intro. In truth, the character Majestros is a warlord from the planet Kira, Khera. Majestros landed on Earth thousands of years ago on a Kiran expedition, along with a handful of others that you can find in other various Wildstorm comics. He can fly, both on Earth and in the vacuum of space. He is super duper strong, he is super duper durable, he's got laser eyes, he's a super genius, and he has mastered Kiran technology, which is far more advanced than that of Earth. Basically, Mr. Majestic can do whatever the author wants him to do in order to tell the story that the author wants to tell. In terms of appearance, he is a super buff with dark hair with a little curl in that hair in the front, similar to another super character, and he does wear a cape. His costume is mostly red and white. He is missing the blue of Superman. But like I said, he's very clearly Superman-coded in appearance and ability, but not in personality. And this is the place that I really originally like Majestros. You see, Majestros is very cold and distant, as he is an alien warlord from a world far more advanced than our own. He has made the decision that he will defend Earth, as it is his adopted homeworld, but he isn't a man of the people, like Superman is, right? So when I went into his ongoing series, originally first released in 1999, I wasn't really sure what I was going to get. Can you do a Superman comic book, but without the heart? Or without examining the fact that without his heart, Superman's kind of a bad guy, as seen in Mark Waid's Irredeemable comics? Can you do Superman without that human connection? And what I found was perhaps two of the best first issues that I have read for a comic book in a very long time. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 33, Some Majestic Comics. Written by Joe Casey and Brian Holguin, with pencils by Ed McGuiness, inks by Jason Martin, and colors by Dan Brown and Digital Chameleon, Mr. Majestic Issue 1 opens big While flying through our solar system, Majestic discovers an alien scout, basically an eyeball with tentacles the size of a moon, scanning the solar system. Before he can stop it, the scout flees, returning to its master. Majestic recognizes this scout, and he knows that this signals a great threat. He returns to Earth and reports the danger to the American government. Along with his super genius cyborg friend Desmond, they come up with a plan to save us. Majestic then spends decades rearranging our solar system. He moves the moon, like he pushes the moon around. He puts on gloves and he pushes the moon. Using his I-beams, he changes the chemical composition of Jupiter. He adds some rings to Mars by stealing moons from outside of our solar system and then pulverizing them to create rings. Majestic is hoping to make the system so different from what was reported back that the threat that is coming won't recognize the solar system when it gets here. He's literally putting a disguise on our solar system. And the thing that I love the most is that it works. Majestic misses the entire Vietnam War in doing this, but when the nameless threat arrives, it doesn't know what it's looking at. All it knows is this isn't what its scout reported, so it moves on. In issue 2, strange time anomalies are happening all over Earth. Majestic spends the majority of this issue handling these various threats, while Desmond scientifically figures out the cause. It ends up being a little girl named Kata Kingsley. Why this is happening to her or from her, we don't know. All we are told that it needs to be stopped. So Desmond and Majestic build a device that looks like these blocky glowing headphones, and Mr. Majestic confronts Kata. She tells him that she isn't trying to cause trouble. She just wants to see her dad again. Majestic asks her to imagine the best day of her life, and then to close her eyes and pretend that she is there right now with her father. He activates the device. And in the next panel, she's gone. When Majestic returns to his base, he questions whether they did the right thing in eliminating this threat. To Desmond, that isn't the right question. There just is no right answer here. There is no moral right or wrong. All he knows is that if the girl stayed around, then the entire world would have been destroyed. All of humanity wiped off the cosmic map. They did what they had to do in the name of plain survival. And as the guy who did the deed, Majestic certainly hopes that that is the case. The issue then ends somewhere else. We see Kata and her father having a wonderful time on the swings of a playground. He promises her ice cream. She smiles. And that is what has sold me on this comic. Issue 1 of Mr. Majestic shows us the scale that this comic is going to be operating on. We've got big ideas, big threats, big actions. Sure, Mr. Majestic himself is a bit closed off, but the sheer scale of what he's doing is so amazing and cool that I enjoyed the issue anyways. I'll fully admit, I finished issue 1 and I went, oh, that was a good comic, and then I set it down and I didn't think anything else of it. But issue 2 then brings us right back down to the human level, right back down to the ground. Sure, the threat of the comic and the idea of it is still really big. Time anomalies, world destruction, a last-minute save, but now it's on such a heartbreakingly human level instead. Instead of this massive, unknowable alien threat from beyond our comprehension, suddenly it's just this innocent little girl who didn't ask for these powers, who just wants to see her dad again. These comics also demonstrate to us that Mr. Majestic does have emotions. He spends the whole first issue rearranging the guts of our solar system, and in doing so, he misses years of Desmond's life. When we open up at the beginning of the issue, Desmond's a little kid in a Professor X-style hover chair with cyborg parts, and then the next time we see him, suddenly he's a teenager and a young adult. Majestic doesn't even comment on the sudden change in his age. But then we see here in issue 2 that Majestic regrets having to kill that little girl. Majestic might not be human, and he might not care too deeply for us as a species, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't care about anything at all. That's a really complicated character. That's really smart writing. That's a level of depth that, quite frankly, honestly, and I'm sorry to say it, I haven't been seeing a lot of in Wildstorm's comics that I have been reading. It is the perfect two-issue combo. Big concepts, big scale, and big heart. And in reading these two issues, I suddenly understood exactly what was going on in this book and what I would be getting from it moving forward. Author Joe Casey says in a letter from him at the end of issue 1 that when he came up with part of the idea for this book, he really wanted to swing big with it. And I think that he utterly knocks it out of the park. While I'm not going to go into them in detail here, issues 3 and 4 are great as well. Issue 3 reinforces the idea for us that this stuff is all happening in the Wildstorm universe, because up to this point you might as well just be reading a standalone comic. But Majestic hangs out with fellow former Wildcat Ladytron for a movie date, just platonically as friends. It's not just the perfect way to remind you that Majestic exists in a shared universe alongside other characters, but it also helps ground him in human activities. And Ladytron is the perfect complement for someone like Majestic. She's loud, she's vibrant, she swears all the time, she punches whoever she feels like, whenever she feels like it, and she is perhaps the most passionate cyborg that I've ever seen in comic books. Where Majestic feels cold and distant, Ladytron is down to earth and alive. That contrast works for both of them, and it helps to draw out parts of Majestic that we, as people, can sympathize with. Issue 4 then sees Mr. Majestic resurrect his son, Magistrate, and in doing so, accidentally endanger the Earth. But it's okay, because Majestic raised his son to be a good person, to be a hero. And so he sacrifices himself to save his father's adopted homeworld. The issue is warm and loving, full of these great small father-son moments. But it does remind me that Majestic just killed a little girl who loved her father 2 issues ago. And as a father, that must have broke his heart. When he loses Magistrate here, it is heartbreaking within the context of the comic. I kinda can't help but wonder if Majestic's experience with Kata isn't what inspired his desire to bring Magistrate back to life after so long on Earth without him. How flooping tragic would that be? Majestic certainly never says that this is the case, but it is interesting to me that he waited so long to resurrect his son until he had to kill that little girl, and that probably brought all of these feelings up to him. Reading these comics now in 2025, I do have to say that they don't feel all that amazing in terms of their story content. Like, don't get me wrong, these are good comics. I wouldn't have written an episode about them if it didn't make me feel some kind of way, especially while juggling with my own child. But for a comic in which author Joe Casey said he wanted to take some wild storytelling swings, these feel fairly normal at this point. But then I had to stop and think, because the modern authors who do this kind of writing really came up in the world of comics either around this time or after. For example, Majestic rearranging the solar system in issue 1. That feels very similar to some of the ideas that I read in the Superman crossover, Our Worlds at War, which I covered previously on the show. It was there that, like, Pluto got stolen by Brainiac and got turned into a war world. We saw Superman push the planet-eating Imperiacs back through time to before the Big Bang happened, and then we saw that him dying and exploding is what created the DC universe. He made the Big Bang happen, right? So when I think of big comic book ideas, this is the kind of thing that I'm thinking of. And you know what? Penciler Ed McGuiness leaves Mr. Majestic after issue 6 to go draw, check this out, Superman. And when this volume of Mr. Majestic ends, where does author Joe Casey go? To DC, where he writes The Adventures of Superman, including the issues that tie into Our Worlds at War. So despite the fact that I read these comics and I enjoyed them, but I was going, I'm a little underwhelmed by these. It's not that these comics, this volume of Mr. Majestic, was underwhelming. It's that the comics since these comics have already done this style of storytelling in a far more public, far more vibrant, far more noticeable space. I would make the argument that without these 6 issues of Mr. Majestic, you wouldn't have seen Joe Casey's run on The Adventures of Superman. You may not have seen Ed McGuiness on Superman with Jeff Loeb. And you know, that is some pretty majestic writing. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.